What happened in Episode 7 of The Rings of Power? How does it fit in with Tolkien's Legendarium? And what does it mean for next week's finale? Let's take a look. On this channel we cover breakdowns, explanations and deep dives into the lore and history of J.R.R. Tolkien's world, as well as other great fantasy books and TV shows like Game of Thrones and The Witcher. If that sounds good, then please consider clicking on the subscribe button in the bottom right of your screen and the bell icon. The action this episode picks up in the wake of the volcano eruption at the end of episode 6. It's quite a chaotic scene. Buildings are destroyed, people dead and injured, although many of the main characters like Galadriel seem to have escaped without even a light burn. There are mental scars though. Theo blames himself for the carnage because he gave Adar the sword hilt, and has presumably in the meantime figured out that that was what unleashed the flood and caused the eruption. Galadriel, meanwhile, thinks that she is responsible, though she doesn't say exactly why. Galadriel also talks about losing her husband, Celeborn. This is a nod to something the Tolkien fandom have been wondering about throughout this season. Celeborn is definitely alive in the Legendarium at this point, so where is he? Galadriel talks about him going off to war and not seeing him again. Presumably that was in the First Age, so centuries earlier. Galadriel implies that he must be dead, but presumably he will arrive back at some point in future seasons, and presumably there's a reason for his long absence. I wonder whether this means that Celebrian, their daughter, hasn't arrived yet, because Elrond should be falling in love with her at some point during the timeline of the show. Maybe they will leave her out. There's a lot to unpick here, but perhaps it will all wait for a future season. Miriel survives, but appears to have lost her sight, and poor Ontomo is dead. Elendil seems unscathed by it all, but appears keen to return to Numenor, which is ironic, because according to Tolkien, he will be High King of this area sometime. Arondir is also okay, as is Bronwyn, who seems to be healing well from that wound she took in the battle. They all gather in the Numenorians' camp, abandoning their former home. Having come back together, though, everyone soon heads off in different directions. We see Beric the horse gallop off, presumably to find and rescue Isildur. He is, without doubt, the bestest boy of this show. I hope Isildur rewards him with a whole apple this time. Miriel sets off back to Numenor with Elendil and vows to return. It will be fascinating to see what Pharazôn has been up to in her absence, and how the proud Numenorians will react to the humbling of their expeditionary force. Bronwyn and co. head off down to Pelagia, saying it is an old Numenorian colony. Years later, this will become Gondor's main port. You may remember it from The Lord of the Rings. That was the port that Aragorn took the dead men of Dunharrow to, driving off the corsairs of Umbar. Galadriel will head off to report back to Gil-galad. She will have quite the story to tell, given that Gil-galad last saw her when he was waving her off on a boat to Valinor. And she will take Halbrand with her, because Halbrand is not well and needs elvish medicine. Lindon and Gil-galad would be a very long way away, so maybe she will head for Eregion. Elrond is in Eregion, and later will become known as the greatest healer in the land, so perhaps that. We haven't seen him for a bit, but Celebrimbor is also in Eregion, of course, and his great forge is probably nearly ready now. And we know how much Halbrand loves to craft things. Maybe he'll get the chance to make stuff with Celebrimbor once he gets healed. All this leaves Adar and the Orcs in charge of the Southlands, or Mordor as we shall call it from now on. Let's head north a bit, to the Harfoots, who are nearing the end of their migration to the Grove. But sadly for them, their wonderful orchard has been hit by one of the fiery rocks flung from Orodruin last episode. As an aside, this now very much ties the timing of this storyline in with what is happening down in Mordor. Some parts of the fandom had speculated that perhaps there were a couple of different timelines happening in the show, but I think we can now be clear that there isn't. It's all happening at the same time. Meteor Man, the stranger, now heals the trees. He really is learning to control his powers a lot better, and is using them for good, not just randomly killing fireflies or scaring Nori. I had originally thought that he might have been a Balrog in human form because of all the fire and evil imagery, but now I'm backing down on that one. The evidence doesn't seem to support it anymore. He's probably some sort of wizard, though we will still need an explanation for why he arrived by meteorite, and what he's doing there. The two blue wizards were both in Middle-earth in the Second Age, so perhaps he's one of them. Those three cultist-looking types have nearly caught up with him, though, and I don't think there's any doubt that they are evil. They casually burn the Harfoot's wagons for no good reason. And having sent the stranger off to seek his own kind, the Harfoots now decide to go after him to warn him about the people hunting for him, which is good. The Harfoots are clearly growing from their rather callous approach of leaving behind the weak and frail during the migration itself. A couple of things to note before we move on. Sadok points out the forest of Greenwood the Great in the distance, saying that the big people live beyond that. Greenwood the Great is the old name for Mirkwood before it became corrupted by Sauron's presence in the Third Age. Beyond that lies the Anduin Valley, which is where we first hear of hobbits settling down, so perhaps they will end up there in the show. And then the Misty Mountains, which is where Khazad-dûm is. The Harfoot storyline has remained defiantly separate to the other storylines this season, and it remains a bit of a mystery exactly how and where it will intersect with them. The other thing is the star map. It is apparently known to Sadok, who explains that the Harfoot's ancestors knew of it when they lived somewhere else over a millennium ago, in the First Age presumably. So Meteor Man is still hunting for that. Let's move on to the dwarves. Elrond and Durin Jr. try to persuade Durin Sr. to let them mine the mithril. This is apparently needed to save the life of every elf, but Durin says no. Durin Jr., seemingly out of loyalty to Elrond, does so anyway, uncovering a massive seam of the shiny stuff, though his insubordination leads to that bit of the mine being shut down, him being told off by his dad, and Elrond being chucked out of Khazad-dûm. The two twists in all this are that mithril does seem to have some sort of healing effect on the corrupted leaf, so presumably there is at least some truth to what we've been told, even if I'm still hoping that the bit about the elves needing to bathe in its light is a bit of a lie made up by Anatar, because that seems very out of step with Tolkien's Legendarium, and very much in line with the kind of lie you might tell the elves if you wanted to inject a degree of urgency into their actions. But we also get the reveal that at the bottom of the vein of mithril is a Balrog. The Balrog, presumably, who will later become known as Durin's Bane. Perhaps we're also being invited to assume that it's also the Balrog we saw fighting the elf in that legend Elrond told us about that led to the creation of mithril, which does lead to the question of who then is that elf? It seems a bit odd that they weren't named. Canonically, Glorfindel fights a Balrog, though not above the Misty Mountains. Perhaps we could have a tinfoil theory that in show it was Celeborn. That really would be a good reason not to return to Galadriel. Anyway, tinfoil hats back off again, because that really would be quite a lore stretch. The truth is that anyone who has read Tolkien obviously knows that the Balrog is there below Khazad-dûm, but seeing it now does put a new spin on things. We naturally want to support Durin Jr. in this, but Durin Sr. is right instinctively. Delving too deep would not be good. Durin and Disa's talk of being able to do whatever they want when they inherit takes on a darker tone when you realise that what they want is to dig closer and closer to the Balrog. So where does all of that leave us with just one episode left? With a lot of questions outstanding. So strap yourself in. Who is the stranger? Where does his star map lead? Who are those three people following him, and what do they want? Do elves really need to bathe in mithril light to save themselves? Are we going to see that Balrog again, or was that sighting just to show us that they know he is there? What is Halbrand's backstory that he seems so keen to hide, and what is in his little pouch? What happened with him and Adar? And of course, who and where is Sauron? He has to be somewhere. We will need to have reached something of a satisfactory conclusion on all or at least most of this in the next episode. But what did you make of this episode? What did you spot that I didn't? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. That's all for this time. I'll see you again soon.